Hey everyone, I'm Robin Sweeney and I'm a senior product manager here at Unchained Labs. I'll be your moderator today, and I thank every one of you for joining us. At the end of this webinar, we're going to have a Q&A session. To ask questions, all you have to do is click on the Q&A button that's located either at the top or the bottom of your screen. Once you do that, you can just type your question in and send it over to us. When submitting questions, please avoid clicking the anonymous button. That way we can reach out via email if we aren't able to get to your question live. We'll get to as many of them as we can, but if we have too many, we might just have to reach out over email. And now I would like to introduce Del Ray Jackson, our Senior Product Manager for Big Tuna at Unchained Labs. Today, Del is going to walk you through how this automated buffer exchange solution can help you coast to dead accurate results. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Del.
Why, thank you, Robin. Appreciate that introduction. And hi, everybody out there in the metaverse. I'm really excited to talk to you today. In preparation for this discussion, I've actually been riding my bike. I live out in the Western US, riding my bike around town. I would rather be skiing, but we don't have quite enough snow. And in town, although the hills aren't this bad, it did make me think about the topic a little bit, buffer exchange. And usually that's not the thing that we want to do right away, right? But it is necessary. What we really want to do, though, is get to the top of those hills so that we can coast and, put some epic personal bests on our Strava record. And so speaking of chores, that is usually in one breath, you'll also be talking about buffer exchange. But like most chores, they are critical and they're important. And why are they so important for us and for you? Well, if we're working in biologics and gene therapy, we know that we have these common sample types, and with them, they kind of come with their own little picadillos, their own little problems. And so with LNPs, we know that after manufacturing, they're usually in an organic phase that you want to very quickly exchange out to avoid any further size changes. With AAVs, one of the great things is that you can make them pretty easily. You can get a large volume, but usually it's more dilute or not the right concentration that you want. So you need to not only do a buffer exchange with them, but also do some concentration. And then nucleic acids, obviously desalting, either just to get them more stable or to prepare them for some sort of downstream analysis. That's really critical. My personal favorite, proteins, antibodies, working with those. The challenge with those is that you're doing a lot of screening, formulation, optimization. And so what are the typical ways that we're doing this in our labs today? Well, it shows that like over 70% of people in biologics and gene therapy are still using manual methods. And the reason why might be because they're really accessible, right? So most of us have a centrifuge, we have a fridge with a stir plate, and so doing dialysis is accessible. And so that's one plus with them, but we know that these techniques take time. They're often slow. Dialysis can take up to a few days. With centrifugation, you might get faster results, but your hands-on time goes up with it. And then for TFF, TFF is a great fit if you're downstream, you're already working in production, but during development and discovery phase, you usually don't have enough of those precious samples to justify, doing a complicated TFF setup. And another drawback is that, you're doing these often in the context of formulation. And so for formulation, you want to do screening. And what does screening mean? Well, it means usually that you're working with a lot of samples or a lot of target buffers that you want to get into. And again, it's a chore, it's like going uphill. It's a critical, necessary step because eventually, you want to get through discovery and development and go into production. And, if you're just doing routine sample prep, you also want to, get those samples downstream quicker. Usually the next step is like analytics. And so with all of these, whether we're doing formulation or we're doing just routine prep, usually there's a lot of numbers. And so how can we handle this chore, this tedious chore of preparing all of these different types of samples? Well, spoiler alert, Big Tuna, Big Tuna is a great tool for researchers because it allows them to do up to 96 exchanges, and as we'll see, also concentrations in parallel. So great time savings right there. The volume range is pretty large of what you can work with as samples. So as little as like 100 microliters and all the way up to 48 mils, again, with those AAVs, that's often you're producing them in large volumes. And time is just so critical. So I like to say it's a set it and forget it solution for you and your lab. We say 30 minutes hands-on time, you set it up, but then the great thing is you let it go. And what we're going to look at is, why? Why does that work? Why can you be assured that your samples are going to be taken care of? It all starts with our unfilters. And so this is a plate-based solution, and you have two different formats available for you. You have 96 unfilters and 24 unfilters. And the difference is really just the volume range that you can have for samples. So you're between 100 and 450 microliters with the unfiltered 96, and then you take off in the unfiltered 24 from that 450 microliter all the way up to 8 mils of sample. The molecular weight cutoffs that you have, and they come in regenerated cellulose, which is ubiquitous, in terms of like not having usually non-specific binding for molecules. So it's a industry standard membrane material. They come in 10, 30, and 100 kilodalton cutoffs for both formats. And with the 96 unfilter, we see that a lot of customers are typically working with nucleic acids and DNA in those smaller volumes. So in that unfilter, we have the additional 3 kilodalton molecular weight cutoff. The great thing is working with all of these samples, you have a low cost per sample using our unfilters. So you get your samples in these unfilters, then what do you do? Well, the great thing is Big Tuna is set up as a buffer exchange solution, meaning you don't have to have a robotics or automation background or a programming background. The software is so accessible that what I've seen is that everybody in the lab is going to be using your Big Tuna. So you might have to fight them for it because the software is designed to take you through step by step in a nice, easy flow of setting up your buffer exchanges with or without concentration. Easily, you can import your sample information, the starting concentration, and your buffer lists. And then the really cool thing, again, I said this is a set it and forget it. So part of the forget it part is that you'll constantly get like a readout on the Big Tuna screen of where you're at. So if you set up your run in the morning and it's right before lunch and you want to know, how long can you be out of the lab, you can come back to the Big Tuna software and you'll see a sample by sample feedback on, where your run is at. And so you'll be able to have a good idea of when you have to come back to take your process samples off. So is this done at the expense of like sample integrity, sample recovery? You're thinking like, Dell, this sounds like too good to be true. Well, the key part of this is our approach to buffer exchange and how we are able to do that. And essentially, it's because of our automated pressure-based DF approach. And what this means, and I really love this slide because it summarizes very nicely, why you can get solid results on Big Tuna. It's that in every single buffer exchange cycle, we measure Big Tuna, not me, but Big Tuna will measure your sample volume. And this is really nice because then Big Tuna has an exact idea of how fast things are flowing. And in a perfect world, everything would flow normally and it would be great, but we know that doesn't often happen. And so what Big Tuna can do, because in each cycle, it's knowing how much has been processed in every single well, it knows the exact amount to add back until eventually you reach your overall target exchange value with that optional concentrate step at the end, if you so choose it. Another nice part of this technology, of our buffer exchange technology, is that we do this whole buffer exchange cycle with optional and programmable orbital mixing, which is gentle. And the key part of that is, as you see on the screen there, with other techniques, especially like spin columns on a centrifuge, you can get aggregation or clogging at that membrane interface. The cool thing about Big Tuna, because of doing the gentle orbital mixing, is that we'll keep your precious biomolecules in solution longer, keeping them away from that membrane. And the benefit for you, in addition to higher sample recovery, is also faster exchanges. So enough of me talking. Let's take a look at this on Big Tuna and see it in action. So here you see Big Tuna going over, grabbing that volume sensor. It's actually ultrasonic I've had questions like, can you actually hear it? And no, it's not making noise or anything like that. And what it will do, again, is measure the volume of every single sample and every single well in your unfilter. In this image, it's showing you a 24 unfilter in that buffer exchange chamber, and that's where the magic happens. That's where you apply that positive pressure, which is also programmable for your biomolecules, evenly across your unfilters. Something else you don't get with manual, tedious buffer exchange, sample prep techniques is the fact that you can't program the results that you want. And that's where we get these dead-on accurate results, is because you can program things like how much per buffer exchange cycle do you want to take out? What's the overall target exchange that you want to hit? Is it 96%? Or are you really wanting to do a complete, thorough 99.9% exchange? With Big Tuna, you can program all of that in there. And again, something I find that customers say is very valuable is that they can also do their concentrations. There's no additional step for that. And that concentration as well is also programmable. So what's valuable? Definitely walk away time. And this is showing you why that's important. So one of the reasons why, other techniques can require a lot of hands-on time is because of those buffer additions. With Big Tuna, not only do you know exactly per well on a sample by sample basis how much buffer to add, it also happens automatically for you. So this is all going on. You still might say, well, that's great that I can go off and do other things, but how long is it going to take? And of course, many factors go into that: the concentration of your samples, what the actual buffer might be, your molecular weight cutoff. But this is a good representation of, you can get results in as little as an hour or, half a day with Big Tuna. And again, you can get the feedback so you can work this into your normal operation throughout the day. But it doesn't come at the expense of reduced sample integrity or potential sample loss. Your gene therapy, especially gene therapy biomolecules, are very precious. And so Big Tuna is going to measure how much is being exchanged. What is that flow rate on a sample by sample basis? And in this example here, we're looking at with monoclonal antibodies, we can see that the third sample, maybe it wasn't characterized well up front, it was running a little bit faster. But that's the nice part about Unchained Labs buffer exchange technology, is that we will adapt to that and make sure everything overall flows evenly. So we got this nice tool in our lab. What can we use it for? Here's one example of a formulation study. And so working with monoclonal antibodies, something you want to know is, well, how are they going to act? What's the best optimal buffer for them to maximize stability? So in our example of 4 mAbs with 6 excipients, 6 different buffers with a starting 8 ml volume. And again, you see an example of how we can program how much is removed per cycle, as well as our overall buffer exchange target. And we're going to do the concentration of 5x concentration. And in this example, that happened. That monoclonal antibody 3 ran a little bit faster, but you can see that Big Tuna was able to adjust for each of them. And drum roll, the results are that we get even, consistent, dead-on accurate concentration values. So here we started with about 10 mg per mil per sample, did a 5x concentration, ended up at 53.6 mg per mil. This was all done in one run. Today's lab, we know that data is very critical. So even something like buffer exchange, which you don't get this data readout if you're doing manual approaches, with Big Tuna you will. So whether you have upstream or downstream groups waiting on your buffer exchange, you'll be able to give them, really detailed information on every single sample and pass it along. Doing formulation studies, another part of that is, characterizing how stable they're going to be. And so using our Uncle, which is another product from Unchained Labs, you're able to measure that stability, the thermal stability of it. And this is so nice because overall, we did our prep with Big Tuna during the day. We set up our run on Uncle, and overnight we were able to do a full formulation screen, basically in one day, of 24 different conditions. So very powerful. You may be working with AAVs in your lab. And so here we have an example of using the AAV9 serotype. And again, we want to do a buffer exchange. And you can see the benefits of of slogging through that chore of letting Big Tuna do that for you so you can coast on to the next thing. In this case, it would again be checking stability using the viral toolbox applications. There's a suite of applications on Uncle to characterize them. And so setting up our AAVs, we're able to do this exchange and concentration. And here you can see that we did 5 different buffers, and this took under 2 hours. So great time savings. And then we could coast right on through, take those samples off Big Tuna, put them on the Uncle, and then start to get some feedback. And this is just a nice demonstration. I like it because it shows that approach, our approach to doing automated buffer exchange with our buffer exchange chamber, it doesn't, reduce your sample quality. You can see that most of these were intact, but we got some feedback that the citrate phosphate buffer did lead to aggregation. What else do we have out there? Well, LNPs, very hot vector right now. A lot of studies are ongoing with them. We have many customers who are using Big Tuna to process them. And in this representative case, again, very realistic to what you would find in a lab, needing to remove the organic phase after production. And the reason why you want to do that very quickly is because the size can continue to change the longer your LNPs are in that organic phase, or typically in ethanol. And so how does Big Tuna address that? Well, it can do these exchanges and concentrations very quickly. So here in this example, it took about 90 minutes. But did it affect the sample quality? No, you can see that there was really no loss in encapsulation. And so it was great. You need to make your LNPs, but you want to get on to the next, the next step, whether that's within your group and you're going to do characterization. And really, that's the power of Big Tuna, is it allows you to coast through the tedious chores of doing your sample prep, your buffer exchange, your concentration. And it's fast, it frees you up from having to be tied, to a centrifuge, for instance. And you're going to get nice results, have high sample recovery, greater than 95%, to very accurate targets, whether that's in an overall buffer exchange or in a concentration target that you want to get to. And this really, opens up being able to do fast formulation studies or doing very fast, like gene therapy sample preps for you. So with Big Tuna in your lab, you're going to look like this guy. You're going to be happy because the tedious part's taken care of for you, and now you can coast on to really what you want to get to next, which is faster results downstream. And so there, I'll pause, take a moment, and hand the microphone, so to speak, back to Robin.
Thanks, Del, for taking us through how Big Tuna works. It sounds like Big Tuna is able to eliminate manual time for buffer exchange, get consistently high recovery, and speed up formulation studies, all for a variety of molecules, which is pretty cool. We have some great questions that have already been submitted, but as a reminder, you can still ask a question by entering it in the Q&A section of the Zoom navigation bar. Let's get started with some of the questions, though. So first, Del, does Big Tuna work with mRNA?
Yes, yeah, so we're kind of, I guess, summarizing the different biomolecules that can be used. We definitely have customers using it for mRNA, obviously RNA, DNA, VLPs. And so the key part, if you're wondering if your biomolecule works, we have a wealth of white papers out there for you. But really it comes down to how they'll respond to regenerated cellulose, and then the size for them. So the size cutoff that would work.
What about, can I use a partial unfilter?
I get this question a lot. So we are plate-based, and in an ideal world, you'd always have 96 samples, or you'd always have 24 samples. So you can use partial unfilters. What you can't do is reuse any wells that are processed.
And a little bit more of an open-ended one, what changes happen with buffer exchange for different sample types?
Yeah, I mean, I like to show that slide that talk, with the arrows and showing what happens in a buffer exchange cycle. And that volume measurement is a really key part of that. But in the end, Robin, all that really happens is the amount of time that your samples are going to be pressurized. And so you have 15, 30, and 60 PSI, and those are usually suited to your biomolecule of interest that you're processing. but the adaptive part really just changes the time during processing. So if something's running really fast, we'll shorten that buffer exchange cycle.
How does Big Tuna handle samples that run at different rates within the same unfilter?
Yeah, so basically that same thing scenario I guess I was just describing is, again, so your samples are very precious, and so as we see something running very fast, we'll actually reduce the amount of time with the overall goal. So what you could, and you have a little bit of ability to tweak this in the settings in Big Tuna software, but overall Big Tuna is going to guarantee that you don't lose any of your samples, so it reduces the buffer exchange cycle time essentially.
Okay, awesome. It looks like we have a similar question. Will the fast flowing samples slow down your process? As I understood that the flow rates are adjusted by Big Tuna. So I know you kind of just went over that a little bit, but just hit on that.
Yeah, thank you for all the questions, and I'd like to really clear this up because I know going through a PowerPoint, some of those details can get lost. So yeah, essentially that's what it will change, is it will extend your overall process. And what I like to remind customers is that shouldn't be too much of a concern because this is a walk-away solution for you. And again, the overall goal is that you wouldn't lose any of those samples. Now there is a nice feature I didn't go into detail. Again, you can get that feedback and you'll get like a per well readout in the software. And if you see that something's pretty much done already, but maybe the other wells are taking a long time, we've built into the software the ability to pause the run and then remove those samples. You can pipette them directly from the unfilter out of the buffer exchange chamber, and then you can resume the run. And as we would go over this in training, but as a rule of thumb, or our recommendation is really that your volumes, and as much as possible within a range, Robin, the concentration should be in the same ballpark.
Yeah, it makes sense. You want to run similar things across a plate, right? Okay, so what about integrating Big Tuna into a automated lab? Is that possible?
Yeah. Completely possible. Big Tuna is a great fit for that. I know I say like, oh, it's not automation. It is automation. It's just a very nice buffer exchange solution. But we have automation integration capabilities. So physically, we have customers who have unfilters that are being transported to and from. So we can do that. And then we have an API, and if you know what APIs are, that's the ability to programmatically control Big Tuna software with your own software, be that your LIMS, or maybe you have overall like scheduling software. So Big Tuna is a great fit for labs that have upstream or downstream automation that they want to integrate into.
And then what about the size of Big Tuna? Like, can you give a rough estimate of what the footprint of it is in a lab?
It's like this. It's it does come on a cart, and so but it can be put on a bench top. But if you're familiar with liquid handlers in a lab, it's roughly, I suppose about 1 meter in width, and can sit either on a bench or on the cart that it comes with.
I like your about this. What about, can you get rid of surfactants with buffer exchange on Big Tuna?
So I kind of want to come back to that. I'll give an answer right now, and if we kept track of who we followed up for. But definitely, like if surfactants will flow through, we can remove them. But the principle that we're working with using regenerated cellulose membrane is really size exclusion. And so if there's other techniques to remove surfactants, like if some sort of affinity that are more efficient, that might be a better choice. But definitely, like if they will flow through, if they're like small enough to go through, you can clean them up a little bit. But really, we're doing size-based buffer exchange with Big Tuna.
Okay, my own personal question is that where kind of the different molecular weight cutoffs help. You can pick the right size for whatever your surfactant molecule is.
Yep, so you could do some tweaking there. Yeah, good point.
Okay, let me see. One more clarification, it looks like just on the flow rates adjusted, are they adjusted well to well, or can you just describe kind of what you mean by adjusted flow rates?
Yeah, so we really can only put one pressure setting, and we can control the amount of time. And so up front, you'll be at, again, 15, 30, or 60 PSI. And so we're not necessarily controlling like an individual well's flow rate because we're pushing positive pressure across that whole plate very evenly. But what we can control is the amount of time that's pushed through. So again, going back to that one slide that we had of the 4 monoclonal antibodies with the third one running fast, it's not so much that we're controlling that individual well, but what Big Tuna does see is that, oh, that one's flowing faster. And so let me make sure so we don't dry that out. We'll sort of taper back the buffer exchange time. So the overall flow rate is tracked, on a sample by sample basis. You get a nice readout even in every single cycle, how fast stuff is flowing. But yeah, not to mislead anyone, we're not controlling an individual well's flow rate. We're controlling the overall flow rate for that entire unfilter.
Perfect. Well, Del, it looks like we're coming up on the end of our time. So I'll
I'm
stop
having
grilling you
fun.
with questions for now.
All right.
So I want to thank everyone for asking all of these great questions, and Del, of course, for answering them, and your awesome presentation. If we didn't get to your question, or if you still have more questions, don't worry, we can reach out to you over email and you can do the same with us. So thank you all who joined us live today. If you do want to have that deeper conversation with our team or ask us some questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Our email is info@unchainedlabs.com, or you can learn more at our website, which is www.unchainedlabs.com. We'd love to connect with each of you. And we, again, thank you for attending this virtual seminar. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.